The three most powerful artifacts of good in the Third Age were not weapons of war. They were instruments of defiance against the very laws of time. Their secret purpose was to halt decay and create hidden paradises in a fading world. A goal so subtle and profound, it makes the quest to destroy the One Ring seem a crude and desperate gamble. These were the rings of the elves, and their story is one of tragic hope, secret power, and the quiet preservation of light in an ever-darkening world. To understand the three, one must first understand the great sorrow of the elves of Middle-earth. By the Second Age of the world, the firstborn children of Ilúvatar were dwindling. Their great kingdoms of the First Age were sundered and drowned, their mightiest heroes slain. Those who remained in the mortal lands felt a weariness settle upon their immortal spirits. They were bound to the circles of the world, yet the world itself was changing, aging, and becoming a place ever more alien to their nature. This was the long defeat, a slow, inexorable fading. The light of Valinor, the undying lands from which many of them had come, was now a distant memory, a pang of longing that never ceased. They yearned to create on Middle-earth a semblance of that blessed realm, to build lands that would not wither, where beauty would not tarnish, and where memory could be held unchanged against the ceaseless tide of the years. It was a noble goal. It was a vulnerability. And into this profound melancholy, this deep-seated fear of decay, stepped a figure of unparalleled cunning. He came among the elves not as a dark lord, but as a friend. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He claimed to be an emissary of the Valar, the great powers of the world, sent to aid the peoples of Middle-earth and share his vast knowledge. Nowhere was he received more eagerly than in the land of Eregion, the realm of the Noldoran smiths, located near the great dwarven city of Khazad-dûm. Here lived the Gwaith y Myrdain, the people of the jewelsmiths, led by the greatest craftsman since Feanor himself, Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor. They were masters of artifice, and Annatar's promises resonated with their deepest desires. He spoke of secrets that could enhance their skill, of arts that could give them power over the very substance of the world, allowing them to preserve all that they held dear. But what if time itself could be tamed? What if decay could be held at bay? It was this desperate hope that would open the door to the world's greatest deceiver. Under the tutelage of Annatar, the skill of the elven smiths of Eregion grew to heights previously unimagined. They began to experiment with the creation of rings, artifacts that could contain and amplify specific powers. For a time, it was an age of wonder. Together, Annatar and Celebrimbor devised the craft of the Rings of Power. In this period, from roughly the year 1200 to 1500 of the Second Age, many rings were forged. The initial essays and lesser rings were but practice. Then, they began the great work. The smiths of Eregion, with Sauron's direct guidance, forged 16 powerful rings, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, and 9 for mortal men doomed to die. These rings were mighty indeed, capable of amplifying the natural abilities of their wearers, warding off the weariness of time, and in the case of men, prolonging life indefinitely. But every single one was touched by Sauron's mind and malice. He had a hand in their making, pouring a measure of his own corrupting influence into their very fabric. They were instruments of his ultimate design. The Gwaith y Myrdain, the people of the jewelsmiths, saw only a path to salvation. They could not see the shadow that stretched from this Lord of Gifts all the way to the fires of Mount Doom. They were blinded by their own good intentions, by their desire to make the world a better place, a more beautiful place. Yet, Celebrimbor was the grandson of Feanor, the most brilliant and headstrong of all the elves. The arts that Annatar taught him, he mastered, and then surpassed. At the peak of his power, working alone after Annatar had departed from Eregion, Celebrimbor began his secret, greatest work. He sought to create rings of even greater power, untainted by the hand of the Lord of Gifts. He poured all his skill, all his love for Middle-earth, and all his desire for preservation into the making of 3 final rings. These were to be for the elves alone. Their power was not for domination or for wealth, but for understanding, for making, and for healing. They were fundamentally different. First, he forged Narya, the Ring of Fire, set with a great ruby. Its power was not to command flame, but to enkindle hearts, to inspire hope and courage in others, to resist tyranny, and to ward off despair. It was a flame in the darkness of the mind. Then he forged Nenya, the Ring of Water, made of mithril, and set with a stone of adamant, a diamond that shone with the light of the stars. Its power was that of preservation, of protection from evil, and of concealment. It could keep a place hidden and untarnished by the passage of time and the evils of the outside world. And finally, he forged Vilya, the Ring of Air, the mightiest of the three. Made of gold and set with a great blue sapphire, its powers were the most subtle, and perhaps the greatest, though they are less spoken of. It was believed to have the power of healing and preserving, and the ability to command the lesser elements, reflecting the vastness of the sky itself. But in secret, drawing on knowledge he had gained, yet turning it to his own pure purpose, Celebrimbor completed his greatest work, an act of creation Sauron knew nothing of, until it was too late. For far away, in the black land of Mordor, the deceiver had finally completed his own masterwork. In the fires of Orodruin, Mount Doom, Sauron forged a last ring, a master ring. Into this one ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. It was the key to his entire plan, for the One Ring was made to be the master of all the others, and through it, he could perceive their thoughts and control the minds of their bearers. And in that precise moment, in Eregion, the elves were made aware. It was as if a veil had been lifted. The fair guise of Annatar fell away in their minds, and they saw him for what he was, a tyrant of unimaginable evil. They heard his thoughts, felt his will, and understood the terrible trap that had been laid. He was Sauron, the great enemy, returned. Celebrimbor, in anguish and fury, knew he had been utterly betrayed. He had been a pawn in a scheme to enslave all the free peoples of Middle-earth. But Sauron's plan was not yet complete. While he could dominate the bearers of the Nine and the Seven, the three remained a mystery to him. He had not touched them. His hand had not been in their making. Therefore, while they were subject to the One, he could not defile them or their bearers so easily. He desired them above all others, for in them was a power tied to the very heart of Elvendom, a power he coveted but could not replicate. Enraged that the elves had perceived his designs and defied him, Sauron revealed himself in his true form and amassed a great army. He demanded that all the rings of power be surrendered to him, claiming they were made only by the knowledge he had gifted. The elves refused, and so began the War of the Elves and Sauron. It was a brutal, devastating conflict. Sauron's primary target was Eregion, to seize the rings and punish the smiths who had dared to defy him. Celebrimbor, now the last hope of his people, knew the city would fall. His own life was forfeit, but he had to ensure the three, his greatest creations, the last untainted hope of the elves, did not fall into the enemy's hands. In his final hours, as the enemy battered the gates of his great hall, he made a decision that would shape the fate of Middle-earth for the next 5,000 years. He took Vilya, the Ring of Air, and Nenya, the Ring of Water, and sent them in secret to the most powerful elven lords remaining in Middle-earth. Vilya he entrusted to Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, in the land of Lindon. Nenya he sent to the Lady Galadriel, who had perceived Annatar's evil from the beginning, and had withdrawn to the realm of Lothlórien. The third ring, Narya, the Ring of Fire, he kept with him for a time, a last act of defiance. He gave it also to Gil-galad just before the end, some say, while others claim he passed it to Círdan the shipwright at the Grey Havens. What is certain is that before the gates were breached and the dark tide swept in, the three were safe. They were scattered. They were hidden. Sauron's forces overwhelmed him. The last great craftsman of the Noldor was taken alive, dragged in chains from the smoking ruins of his own workshop. But what happened next was not a swift execution. For what Sauron craved even more than revenge was knowledge. Where were the other rings? The 16 he had helped create? That was the question Sauron hammered into Celebrimbor's mind. Under torments that history dares not record, the elven smith's body was broken. But was his spirit? This is the hidden tragedy of the Rings of Power. We focus on the One and the Three, but the fate of the 16 was sealed in this dark moment of agony and betrayal. Under that duress, Celebrimbor finally yielded. He revealed the locations of the 7 and the 9. They were lesser works, he may have reasoned, tainted already by Sauron's touch in their conception. Giving them up was a bitter price, but one that might preserve the greater secret. But of the three, he would not speak. Sauron pressed him, unleashing new and more terrible pains, for he could sense that Celebrimbor held back the greatest prize. He could feel their existence, a pure, defiant light just beyond his reach. Yet Celebrimbor, with the last of his extraordinary will, sealed his mind. He gave Sauron nothing. The secret of Vilya, Nenya, and Narya died with him. This single act of defiance, in the face of absolute despair, may have saved Middle-earth. Enraged by this failure, Sauron's cruelty found a new, horrific expression. He had Celebrimbor slain, but his body was not left to rest. Sauron had it bound to a great pole and shot through with orc arrows. He then raised this gruesome standard, the body of the one who forged the rings, and used it as his banner. He led his armies out of the ruins of Eregion with the broken Prince of the Noldor as his war emblem, a terrible warning to all who would dare defy the Lord of the Rings. With the knowledge torn from Celebrimbor, Sauron hunted down and reclaimed all 16 of the Lesser Rings. Now his great design could finally be put into practice. He would distribute them as gifts, a poisoned chalice offered to the rulers of Middle-earth. He began with the race he knew best, the race most susceptible to the lure of power: men. 9 rings he gave to 9 mortal lords, great kings, sorcerers, and warriors of their age. They saw the rings as a means to achieve their ambitions, to gain wealth and magical power beyond all others, to escape the one thing they feared most: death. At first, the rings brought them everything they desired. They became mighty in their day, their lives unnaturally prolonged, but there was a terrible cost. For the rings were bound to the One, and their power was Sauron's power. Slowly, one by one, they faded. They did not truly die, but were drawn into the world of shadow, their physical forms stretched and warped until they were nothing but extensions of Sauron's will. They became the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths, his most terrible servants, neither living nor dead, their very existence a torment, bound to the will of the One Ring. His plan for men had been a resounding, terrifying success. But what of the dwarves? Sauron gave 7 rings to 7 dwarf lords in their great mountain halls. He believed their tough, resilient nature could be turned to his advantage, that their legendary lust for treasure could be his lever to control them. But Sauron had fundamentally misunderstood the children of Asulit. Their minds were too stubborn, too resistant to domination. They could not be turned into wraiths, or be forced to serve another's will. The rings could not break them. So did his plan fail? Not entirely. While he could not control the dwarves' minds, the rings worked a different, more insidious magic. They amplified the core of their being, their desire for riches. The rings inflamed their natural greed to a fever pitch, a burning, dragon sickness of the soul. This lust for gold drove them to delve deeper and deeper into the earth, to build treasures so vast they became legends. And these immense hoards of unguarded wealth did not go unnoticed. They acted as a beacon, a lure for the great evils that still slept in the deep places of the world. Sauron's rings may not have enslaved the dwarves, but they brought ruin upon them all the same, attracting the fire drakes and calamities that would lay their mightiest kingdoms to waste. It was a failure of control, but a victory for chaos. And so, with men enslaved and the dwarves cursed, Sauron turned his gaze back to his true prize, the elves. The 3 rings remained hidden, their power preserving the last vestiges of light against his encroaching shadow. The war was over, but the great contest for Middle-earth had only just begun. But in his all-consuming pride, Sauron had overlooked a catastrophic flaw in his design. For while the One Ring bound the others, what bound the One Ring? What if its power wasn't just a beacon in Middle-earth, but a signal to something else? That faint ripple, born of Sauron's malice and ambition, did not go unnoticed. It was not a signal to the stars, but a key turning in a lock far older than the world itself. It was an echo of a greater evil, a shadow of the first and mightiest of all foes. For Sauron, in his pride, had forgotten he was but a servant. He sought to become the absolute lord of Middle-earth, but the evil he channeled flowed from a deeper, darker source. The One Ring was not just his masterwork. It was a homing beacon for the master he had long ago betrayed. And across the sea, in the undying lands, the guardians of the world felt the tremor. Manwë, lord of the breath of Arda, whose sight could pierce any cloud, and whose thought could travel on any wind, saw not only the darkness gathering in Mordor, he felt the ancient wound of the world ache anew. He felt the faintest stirrings from beyond the doors of night, where his brother, Melkor Morgoth, the great enemy, was imprisoned. Sauron's work was not merely a conquest. It was an infection, a sickness that threatened to weaken the very fabric of existence and allow the original darkness to seep back in. The Valar were bound by their own law. After the cataclysm of the War of Wrath, which drowned Beleriand to defeat Morgoth, they had sworn never again to bring their full might to bear upon the children of Eru. They would not shape the world with force, but they would not abandon it to the shadow. A new plan was devised, a countermove in the great game. They would not send an army to dominate, but messengers to guide. 5 emissaries, clad in the frail flesh of old men, their power veiled, and their memories clouded. They would be sent to unite the free peoples, to rekindle hope, and to counsel wisdom against the rising tide of despair. They were the Istari, the wizards. As Sauron marshaled his wraiths and cursed the races of the world, a new power arrived, unlooked for and unknown. It was a quieter power, not of domination and control, but of sacrifice, courage, and the enduring hope that even in the deepest darkness, the light has not been extinguished. The board was set, the shadow had made its move. And now, the light had answered. The great war for the One Ring was about to begin. The sagas of the Second Age have been written in fire and blood. But the greatest tales of the Third Age are yet to be told. To witness the coming of the wizards, the rise of Gondor, the fall of Isildur, and the final, desperate quest to destroy the one thing that binds them all, subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The history of Middle-earth is waiting.